The storm had come out of nowhere that night, much like the guilt that had settled in Victor's heart. It had been years since he had thought of Daniel, the bright, eager young man he had once mentored. Yet, as he stood in the rain, looking down the unfamiliar streets of the city, Victor knew he couldn't run from the past any longer. He had abandoned Daniel when the boy had needed him most. The decision to leave had been swift, almost impulsive, but that didn't make it any less devastating. Victor had been one of the most respected mentors in the art world at the time, known for nurturing talent and helping young artists find their voice. Daniel had been his brightest student, a kid with raw, unpolished brilliance. At just 19, Daniel had shown a talent for painting that was far beyond his years. Victor had seen the potential in him immediately and took him under his wing. For a few years, everything had gone perfectly. Daniel had flourished, creating breathtaking works that caught the attention of galleries and critics alike. Victor had been proud of him, perhaps too proud. He had basked in the success of his protégé, taking credit for Daniel's rise, enjoying the attention that came with mentoring someone so talented. But then, just as Daniel's star was about to truly shine, everything had fallen apart. Victor had been offered an opportunity of his own, an exclusive exhibition of his work in Paris, something he had dreamed of for years. It was the kind of opportunity that could redefine his career, elevate him from a respected mentor to a true master in his own right. It had come at the worst possible time. Daniel had just finished his most ambitious piece yet, a large, hauntingly beautiful mural that had consumed him for months. The pressure had been building on him, pressure from the art world, from the critics, from himself. He had started to falter, struggling under the weight of expectation. He came to Victor looking for guidance, for reassurance. But Victor hadn't been there for him. Instead, Victor had chosen Paris. He had left without a word of warning, abandoning Daniel to face the mounting pressure alone. He told himself it was just temporary, that Daniel would be fine on his own, that the boy was strong enough to handle it. But deep down, Victor knew he had left out of selfishness. He hadn't wanted to risk missing his own opportunity, even if it meant abandoning the one person who had needed him the most. By the time he returned, it was too late. Daniel was gone. No one knew where he had gone or what had happened to him. The mural he had been working on was left unfinished, covered in dust in the corner of the studio. The art world quickly forgot about Daniel, moving on to the next rising star, and Victor buried the guilt beneath his own successes, convincing himself that Daniel would resurface one day, that he had simply chosen a different path. But Daniel never reappeared, and the weight of Victor's decision began to eat away at him. It wasn't until years later, after his own career had plateaued, that the guilt truly caught up with Victor. No amount of accolades or exhibitions could quiet the voice inside him that whispered, "You failed him." He had let his own ambition blind him to the responsibility he had to Daniel. He had taken on the role of mentor, of guardian, but when it mattered most, he had walked away. Now, in his late 50s, Victor found himself wandering the streets of the city where he had last seen Daniel, determined to make amends, if such a thing were even possible. He didn't know if Daniel would forgive him. He didn't even know if Daniel would be willing to see him. But he knew he had to try. Victor's search led him to a rundown art studio on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't much, just a small, dilapidated building tucked between old warehouses. But the rumors had been clear. This was where Daniel had been living, where he had been painting in obscurity for years. Victor knocked on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. There was a long pause before it finally opened, revealing a man who was barely recognizable as the bright, hopeful boy Victor had once known. Daniel stood in the doorway, his face older, his eyes hard. The years had not been kind to him. His once vibrant energy was gone, replaced by something darker, something worn down by time and disappointment. He stared at Victor for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Victor," Daniel said finally, his voice flat. "What are you doing here?" Victor swallowed hard, the weight of his guilt almost too much to bear. "I came to apologize," he said quietly, "for what I did, for leaving you when you needed me. I've carried that guilt for years, Daniel, and I'm so sorry." Daniel looked at him for a long time, his face betraying no emotion. You think an apology will fix what happened? Victor shook his head. No, I don't expect it to, but I had to come. I had to tell you how much I regret what I did. Daniel sighed, stepping back and motioning for Victor to enter. The studio was cluttered, filled with half-finished paintings, empty canvases, and scattered brushes. The smell of paint hung heavy in the air, but it lacked the energy, the vibrancy that Victor remembered from Daniel's work. You left, Daniel said as he sat down, his voice quiet but filled with pain. You left when I needed you most. Do you know what that did to me? Victor nodded, sitting across from him. I do now, and I hate myself for it. Daniel's eyes softened for a moment before the anger returned. I thought you believed in me. I thought you were there to guide me. But when everything became too much, you chose your career over me. You abandoned me. I was selfish, Victor admitted. I let my ambition blind me to what mattered most. I was supposed to be your mentor, your guide, and I failed. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to help you now if you'll let me. Daniel was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the unfinished paintings scattered around the room. I don't need a mentor anymore, Victor. That time has passed. Victor's heart sank, but he nodded, accepting the truth of Daniel's words. I understand. There was another long pause before Daniel spoke again, his voice softer this time. But I could use a friend. The words surprised Victor, but they also filled him with a small sense of hope. He had come here seeking redemption, knowing that it might never come. But maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to rebuild something, if not the mentor-protégé relationship they had once shared, then perhaps something new. I'd like that, Victor said quietly. The two men sat in the studio for hours, talking about the past, about the mistakes they had both made, about the lives they had lived apart. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was a beginning. As the night wore on and the rain continued to fall outside, Victor realized that redemption didn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes, it came in the quiet moments of reconnection, in the slow rebuilding of trust. He had lost his way as a mentor, but maybe, as a friend, he could finally offer Daniel the support he had failed to give all those years ago. The lost guardian had returned, and this time he wasn't going anywhere.